It's called being funny. You should try it sometime.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Well, you want to do that podcast thing we do?
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Today is Sunday, July 12th, 2015, and this is episode 123 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hello, Jerry. How you doing, sir? Happy Sunday to you.
Likewise, I'm good. I'd be much better if the weekend weren't almost over.
You know, they really need to be like 6 days long.
Completely agree with that. Absolutely.
I agree with you. It's, as I get older, sadly, it seems like it takes me a day or two to really sort of decompress enough to really start enjoying the weekend, and then I got to go back to work.
Exactly.
It's sad, but such is life.
Yep. Only another 25 to 30 years till retirement. Something to look forward to. First things first, the opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employer, past, present, or future.
It's true.
So, anyhow, first story we have for you this evening comes from the Bromium blog. And this is a follow-on to a story we talked about last week, all of 4 days ago, I believe, related to the hacking team hack. And as I predicted, there is a whole lot of horribleness coming out of this breach, and I do think it's going to continue for some time. So this...
Well, is it horribleness, or is it helping us defend ourselves?
Well, it's horribleness in the in the perspective that attackers are quickly consuming the strategies and tactics that were developed by Hacking Team into their own stuff. So the good news is, I guess, is that now we're seeing the light. This stuff is seeing the light of day, and we'll have an opportunity to defend ourselves. But as I said last time, I think our job is about to get a lot harder.
Fair enough. Carry on.
So. Anyhow, this particular article is a kind of a high-level decomposition of the remote access Trojan that Hacking Team is using, and as they said, there's nothing like super innovative in the RAT. It does have versions for all of the major platforms like Windows Phone, Apple iOS, Windows 32, Windows 64, BlackBerry, Symbian, Android, Mac OS, Linux, no Amiga OS, I guess, so you're okay there. See, that was a joke, and no one laughed. God. So yeah, it has all of the normal features that you would expect, and then a couple of I suppose innovative ones, like the ability to record Skype conversations, which apparently is something that's not all that common. But in addition to all the normal functionality that you would expect, like stealing your contacts out of Outlook and recording sounds through the microphone and grabbing pictures from the webcam, and also apparently stealing your Bitcoin wallets, which apparently is very important for intelligence agencies these days. Just the general stuff, being able to monitor your instant messaging and
well, in all
thing.
fairness, on the Bitcoin, is it about being able to steal or being able to peek into?
Well, it depends on who you ask, because there were just a couple of were they DEA agents who
That's true from Silk Road, yes.
Yeah.
So I could see in the logic of a law enforcement agency wanting to be able to see what somebody had in digital currency as part of their investigation.
Oh, I completely agree.
Yeah,
absolutely. I jest a little bit.
Ah.
So anyway, it also had some interesting. I don't know if these were necessarily innovative evasion techniques, but they appeared to be a little innovative to me in the way that they tried to hide themselves from being monitored. So it looked it had some special routines as it pertains to reading and writing into different processes. So if it basically is trying to avoid analysis, I suppose. And if it sees, if it believes it's being analyzed, it won't do what it's intending to do. But again, they also made a comment that there was apparently some work underway to get it to persist through a UEFI infection, which is just totally awesome. Apparently not complete. And the blog here kind of points out that there was also some kernel mode rootkits that they're not talking about here. But again, I think this is going to be just a treasure trove for both defenders and for the bad guys. But
my thought as I read this is, okay, we have an opportunity here. I want a neutral third party to go circa 2 weeks ago with everybody's security technology that should have a chance of catching this. Set it up and show me who actually detected the entire gambit of what Hacking Team had running. Then I'll think of you as potentially a highly effective endpoint security tool.
We could call it CyberUL, right?
Oh. Not even I should have meant that, not just endpoint, but in line. Because here we've now been handed to us, in essence, an incredibly robust hacking toolkit. Now, it was developed by a commercial operation as opposed to an illicit commercial operation or a foreign government. But everybody says they stop unknowns. Here's a whole suite of unknowns. Show me who in the industry would have stopped this stuff.
That's a great point. I really like that idea. Because one of the things that's going to happen, probably starting next week, is you're going to have security companies holding webinars showing how they block this malware.
Yeah, now.
Yeah, exactly. Now, right.
That's why I'm saying circa 2 weeks ago.
I agree.
Because everybody comes out of the woodwork, just like you said, trumpeting, we protect against Hacking Team or, attack of the week after the fact. So.
Yeah. Yep.
And if we're not getting to the point where we've got some technologies that really can fight this stuff without us having to know about it, we're going to continually get our ass handed to us.
It's true. Well, and especially as these more sophisticated techniques kind of permeate out into general use, right? And which has been my concern for quite some time. And so kind of carrying on to the next story, which comes from the Register, we talked last week that there was a 0-day, a Flash 0-day, and also a Windows privilege escalation 0-day. Adobe did as you mentioned, they pulled out some heroic efforts and patched it, but apparently there have been 2 more Flash 0-days since then. I think one was discovered yesterday and one early today, or I'm not exactly sure of the timing, but neither of them are patched. And apparently at least one of these can escape the Chrome sandbox.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And I fear people are going to get confused. They're going to see this and think, "Oh, I just patched for that. We're fine."
Right. There are 3 distinct CVEs here. Now,
Thus far.
Well, that again, it's going to probably be a fountain of horribleness for some time. I mean, who knows what else is in there?
Well, but think of the flip side. Depending on how widespread this particular code base was, depending on how often it was sold and used, there's a whole bunch of people out there who are now having their functionality they were depending on to hack into things get completely screwed.
Yeah. Yep.
In theory, right? Assuming
that's true.
People patch and whatnot, they're losing a bunch of 0 days and a bunch of capabilities right here. Now, that may be a good or a bad thing depending on who's using it and if you support their activities or not. But
Yeah. So just to take a little bit of a detour, I mused about this on Twitter a little bit, but last week we talked about, I don't think we included the story, but there was also disclosed last week, along with that Flash 0 day, there was a Windows privilege escalation 0 day. And, I got to wondering, what's the practical use of a Windows privilege escalation 0 day if your targets are largely individuals?
Well, is that a stated goal of an individual for a hacking team, as opposed to an organization? The code base has lateral movement capabilities in it, which certainly would lend itself to privilege escalation leveraging.
I guess where I'm at is and maybe this is more on the getting away from law enforcement and more towards the intelligence use of the tool. But thinking narrowly, I guess I've been thinking kind of narrowly about the law enforcement case. Where there probably isn't a great reason for the FBI to hack into a corporation, I guess.
Really, you think that?
Well, maybe I'm naive, I suppose.
Well, you may be right, but the flip side is, if you're a hacking team and you got the capability, why not throw it in the code base? And if they don't use it, they don't use it.
Well, obviously, you're right, because that's what they did.
I mean, I guess. I mean, if I'm thinking like a product manager, right?
Yeah.
Remove a sales objection.
Adjacent markets, right?
Right.
Yeah, I get it. Uh-huh. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. God, we talked about this a little bit last time. These aren't patched yet, right? And they're already in exploit kits, and
that's phenomenal.
It's a horrible, terrible thing for the average user, and I guess I'm growing more and more convinced that we just need to drop Flash like a bad habit.
Well, that is going around the Twitter InfoSec echo chamber like wildfire right now, and I agree. However, at least in some places of employment, there are a number of tools that require Flash, including a number of famous security tools require Flash to run their web consoles.
Same with Java. That's true.
Right.
That's true.
Imperva, for instance, if you want to go hit the Imperva web application firewall console, you need Flash. So how
So one of the other bits of advice going around is to set it so it's click to you have to click to activate it. But I gotta tell you, at least from an end user perspective, I wonder how beneficial that is, because if you're directed to some enticing content, and it says you got to activate it in order to see the funny cat video, are you really gonna not activate it?
No, you're right. This goes back to phishing 101 kind of stuff, right? I think it's really there for IT professionals to have a chance at not getting hit by a drive-by.
Which it does have some utility. I don't mean to be overly critical, I suppose.
No, you bring up a great point, which is that most users are just going to click through the warning and click through the this is not a valid SSL cert, all those sorts of things. They just click right on through.
Yeah.
Yes, I accept the user agreement.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of click to activate, your mom is a click to activate, let me tell you.
Oh, boy. Really? It had to go there, huh?
That's getting cut from the show.
So moving on to our next story, which comes from Tenable. This is kind of an interesting and controversial position to take. The title is Lessons to Learn from the OPM Breach. So this actually was released a couple of days ago, before what happened in the next story happened. So the point of this story is one of the macro level takeaways, and I'm not sure that I agree with this, right? I'm just parroting what's in the article. One of the macro level takeaways from the OPM incident is that OPM started taking information security seriously. They brought in people. They found a They found a breach in progress, and now there's calls for the resignation of the person who, kind of started that ball down the road. And so the lesson to be learned is, hey, you shouldn't go looking for breaches because it's going to shorten your career in the government. Which, man, that's a really cynical.
I have
position.
Seen that exact thought process before in a CIO's office of a Fortune 50 company, private organization, well, public organization, but not government. Very, very similar thought process. If I don't know about a breach, I don't have to deal with it, and I'm not held responsible for it. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying it's not just government. I've seen it elsewhere.
Yeah.
And there's something, there is some rationale to that. There's a couple of counterpoints to it. If, your organization, my organization, I can assure you my CEO does not know about the tactical day-to-day of our InfoSec organization.
No.
Rightly or wrongly, they don't. Right? So it comes down to who do you hire and how do you empower those folks in the positions to run those organizations that really come down to how effective your InfoSec organization may be. And that doesn't mean that the director or the CEO isn't responsible, because they set the tone and they set the budget and they set the political machinations within the organization for the balance of risk. But it's tough to, with what we know right now, it's tough to put the blame solely at the feet of the OPM director. I would look at, who ran the InfoSec team, who was making the risk decisions, find out more about exactly how the OPM hack came about, and given the vectors of infection, were there decisions made around those vectors? Is this a complacency within the organization? Is this, what is it at the root cause that truly allowed them to get hacked like this? And then from there, decide who is at fault. However, this is how the government works, right? This is politics. This is not, rationality.
Yeah, agreed. So in this article, they, keeping in mind the kinds of businesses that Tenable are in, they do recommend that rather than scapegoating your executive, you should instead implement a number of recommendations, which I think some of them are good, and I do want to talk about them in aggregate. Their first one is that, I'll just quote them, right? The first principle of a resilient security program is to discover all your assets as a baseline and as an inventory against which to track activity. Basically, you can't protect what you don't know exists. And apparently, although I still haven't read anything definitive about this, there's a lot of rumor and innuendo that apparently some of this may have been related. Some of the OPM disaster may have been related to assets that weren't being managed or because they didn't know about them. The next recommendation is to implement continuous patching and vulnerability scanning, not just periodic checks. Next one is make sure you have the right technologies in place for your environment, and things like application whitelisting, IDS, segmentation, data encryption, and those sorts of things. Next is users should only have access to what they need to do their job, so least privilege. They point out that OPM already had a plan in place to implement two-factor authentication, so they're moving towards that. But apparently there was also some discussion that the systems administrators commonly used root to access systems. Again, we don't know that actually played a material part in the breach. So then watch your network traffic in real time for anomalies. Now, all of that stuff sounds awesome, right? But let's put ourselves into the shoes of an incoming CISO or the director of the OPM, and you know what? Almost no company is going to be doing all this stuff well, right? You cannot, on a dime, just start doing all this stuff.
That's a 5-year plan. for an organization inside of the OPM.
Yeah,
Sorry,
exactly.
I don't mean to be that cynical about it, but that's a long cycle to get there.
At least.
Because all of these things are not just about getting it stood up. It's about having a process in place. It's about having policy in place. It's about having the gear in place. There's a ton that goes into all of this. Just getting patching and vulnerability scanning done on a regular, continuous basis is incredibly difficult. I'm not saying it's not worthwhile, but it is, that involves everything. Okay, let's just talk about patching just for a moment. Think about that means. It means understanding every operating system in your environment, making sure that the operating system patches are coming down on a regular basis, making sure you don't have any operating systems that are beyond end of life and not getting patches. If you do, you've got to upgrade those to current supported. Then understanding every third-party software in your environment, making sure you're patching those somehow. Understanding anything in your environment you cannot patch or is already end of life as a third-party software and upgrading beyond that. That's a huge, huge task. And how many devices does the OPM have? Do we know offhand?
I've not heard any counts. I got to believe it's probably quite a few, but I don't know.
So that
But you're right on. This is, I think it's easy for us to criticize, but
Well, I think the defense that she could have had is this is the plan we were executing against. Now, it's not going to matter in her case because people are out for blood. But I think only thing we can do is what we can do. And if we lose our jobs, well, that's the risk of doing this job, right? It's if you want to be at a senior level in security, there's a very good chance you're going to have to fall on your sword after a breach.
That's a great point. It's a very good point.
And maybe that means, much like CEOs and other executives have golden parachutes, maybe senior security folks might end up trying to negotiate those in the future because of the risk inherent with the position. I don't know if it'll be successful, but
it's worth trying.
That's all I can say is if she were, their team were on the process of identifying their problems and fixing them, it's a little unfair for her to be fired.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
But this may be why the average CISO tenure is 2 years.
Yeah. But just to play off that for a second. You never that kind of means that a CISO or CSO never really has, often doesn't really have an opportunity to kind of see, quote, it through. And so you end up with, at least in my experience, a lot of half-finished stuff.
Because the next CISO comes in with their agenda.
Right. And they have a different view of priorities, and they have a different relationship with vendors, and they have, whatever. They have a different, they're getting a different set of actions from their board or whatever, right? And so it's kind of always being yanked on the end of the line, and so you're the one that comes in next, and you got all this half done stuff, and nothing's really well protected. So yet again, you got to take the bull by the horns and prioritize to the extent you can. You can't. All this stuff that they recommend in this blog is great advice. I'm not going to argue with any of it, but you're just not going to get it done in a short period of time, and so that's this is a maturation process, and like you said, I think it's a little. Okay. You know what? Let's move on to the next story because I think it makes more sense over here. The next story comes from Ars Technica, and I think this happened on Friday. The OPM director resigned. Apparently under pressure. So what happened is originally the story was that there were, I think, 4 million people affected, and on Thursday of last week, that estimate was put up to 21.5 million people, with some additional, detail around what was stolen, including those I forget the form number, the SF-86s and 85s background check forms, which I guess everybody kind of knew they were stolen, but there was no official admission until last Thursday. And then on Friday, she stepped down, saying that she needed to she felt it was in the best interest to step aside and let someone else come in. And there's lots of speculation. Was she, did she really resign? Was she fired? Whatever. She's gone.
Or were people saying that the cries to get her out were a distraction from actually dealing with the issue? Right, wrong, or indifferent?
Absolutely. I mean, look, her life has had to have been miserable.
Yeah.
for quite some time, and I do think has been a distraction, whether or not she's at fault. And I think a lot of that is because of the grandstanding politicians that are kind of a effect of life in that kind of venue. So, but anyway, I kind of railed on this with, on Twitter. I think that this is not the solution to the problem, right? And I do think that many of us in information security land are going to put into our FUD presentations for our management teams. Hey, look, here's a case where an executive was directly fired for you can directly link her firing or resigning with being hacked. Not a lot of other cases like that. We had the Target one, which kind of was tenuous, but anyway.
When you say this isn't the way to solve the problem, don't you think, though, that at some level, some executives should be held accountable for poor security in the environment?
Yes. However, I think, here's the thing that concerns me with this is that, as I understand it at least, this has not been a secret. The poor security practices at OPM have not been a secret for a long time. And as I understand it, their internal auditor, the OIG, has been dinging them for a long time. So, yes, the executives should be held responsible to that. But you kind of have a fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me kind of situation here where, at least as I understand it, Congress is responsible for the oversight of these kinds of departments. And, my question is, where is the oversight, right?
So let's pull it out of a government agency and bring it back to a corporation. And this situation happens. Who do you hold accountable?
Well, exactly right. So think about this. So you're a largish public company. You've got a board of directors. You've got a CEO. You've got a CIO, a CISO, and all that normal stuff, right? And it doesn't matter what kind of business you're in. There's an audit committee of the board, and the audit committee gets reports year after year after year that information security is pretty bad. It's not being addressed well, right? But they don't make any changes. And then there's a huge hack, and everybody starts pointing at the CEO or the CIO or the CISO. And yes, you can say, they did a terrible job, fine, right? But who's pointing back at the board that didn't do anything? They were being told for years that that bad stuff was going on, that there wasn't the right level of investment, there wasn't the right level of attention, and then they got hacked. And how does the board get to say, oh, we're not responsible for that at all? I don't think they can.
That's a fair question, which is, I think, part of why we're seeing, in theory, everybody keeps talking about how InfoSec security is becoming a board-level concern. So in that case, the board is getting these reports saying that InfoSec is a problem. How does that exhibit itself? Does that exhibit itself, in that the CEO would be given more budget direction to direct towards that, more staffing, hiring more experienced people? Or or
fire them. I mean, that's
sure, replace, sure. But But just playing this out, you're the CEO in that role. The board's saying, "Wow, we are unhappy." Going playing this out a different way. We aren't happy with the level of InfoSec reporting that we're getting back from the audit committee. Go fix it. And I think at that point, then the CEO has to look at what is he holding back. Is it a cultural thing? Is it a risk acceptance thing? Is it a budget thing? There's a lot of things that can cause it.
Yeah, I guess my point is I think it's wholly unfair to lay and you already said it, right? To lay all of this blame at her feet, at Mrs. Archuleta's feet. I think there's a lot of blame to go around here.
But will this exhibit itself, I should say, will this play out now with more directors/CEOs caring more about this issue because rightly or wrongly, their jobs are on the line?
I'm skeptical.
Because I can tell you, one of the biggest problems I see with really doing InfoSec well is having different departments work well together. And the CEO or the director has the ability to make those calls when peers can't.
Yeah, that's true.
So you want to implement two-factor authentication for talking to your most critical applications, and the business guys say, no, that's too much of a hassle for our salespeople. Who wins?
Right.
You know? And anyway, and countless iterations of that sort of conversation.
I hear you. All right. So moving on to our last story. We intended to cover this last show, but ran out of time. The FFIC in the U.S. They're the major banking regulator. It's actually a conglomeration of regulators. So it's the FDIC, the NCUA, the OCC, the Federal Reserve Board, and a couple of other agencies. And so they collectively comprise this FFIC function. The FFIC released this past week, and by the way, I think for a long time, I've personally been exposed to them. I think for a long time they have probably been one of the, in my view at least, maybe I'm being overly generous, I suppose. I don't know, but I think they've for a long time held a much more risk-focused view rather than a control check in the box kind of view. So that was good, and I think that naturally has lended itself to more tight controls at banks than you see in other industries. I'm not saying that banks are great, just saying that they're better than a lot of other industries. Now what's new? The FFIC released what they call their Cybersecurity Assessment Tool, or the CAT. And so this is a tool that banks or financial institutions that are regulated by the FFIC are apparently supposed to start using to both judge their inherent risk and the level of maturity of their controls and their governance, and kind of smash those together and figure out, are they mature enough for the level of risk that they carry? And on the surface, that seems like a very, very sensible thing. But there's some really odd things about this that just, so I'll give you a couple of examples. And again, I think that in concept, this is a great thing. Now, by the way, as I understand it, much of this tool, and it's not really a tool, it's a PDF, right?
Yeah. Let's be clear. There is actually no actual scanner. There's no executable. There's no,
It's a process.
Yeah, and process is in that loose term.
Yeah. So anyway, they have this inherent risk profile grid, and we'll have a link to the program in the show notes. And you can kind of visualize it. Going down the left, you have the categories or types of technologies, and then kind of across the columns, you have your least through most level of risk. And what's really unique about this is, especially in context of other guidance that I've seen the FFIEC release before, again, which I think has been very good. This is very specific. The things that make you least versus most are very specific. For instance, the total number of internet service provider connections is one of the risk items, and the least risk is no connections, and the most risk is they call it substantial complexity over 200 connections, and then there's a minimal, moderate, and significant that fall between 1 and 200 connections.
Can I nitpick for just a moment?
Sure.
So if I have one internet connection and it goes down, as opposed to two internet connections that I can fail over between, didn't I just decrease my risk?
Is that 1 or 2, though?
2, because I've got two different ISPs that I'm load balancing my traffic with via BGP.
But logically, is that 1 or 2?
2?
No, I say 1. See, this is the problem
because it's coming into the same point.
Yes.
So you're counting egress points regardless of the ISP connection.
Well, or ingress points through different. So
if I were load balancing across 20 different ISPs, because I'm just crazy like that,
I would consider that 1.
Because it's one controlled input-output point.
That's how I would view it. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's just your opinion, sir. That's like your opinion.
Fair. Well, it is. You're right. So there's that.
That was a bad attempt at quoting the Big Lebowski, by the way.
Yeah, bad being the operative word there. So so there's some other.
Wait, not done sighing. You can continue your story once I'm done sighing at you.
Go ahead. All right, there we go. Glad you got that out of the way. So some of the other things I think do make really good sense. Like one of them is end-of-life systems.
Yes, we just talked about that a second ago on patching.
I think that one is a really, it's a very good one. The one below it really left me scratching my head. It's open source software. Least risk is no open source software. Minimal risk is limited open source software and none that support critical operations. Moderate risk is.
So what we know now is Richard Stallman's going to be protesting outside of the FFIEC.
They must be. Yeah. So goes on. It goes, right.
I can't get on board with that. I cannot say that open source software is inherently risky.
But I started thinking about this. Okay, at what level are we? What level are we thinking about this? So when, for example, we had Heartbleed and Shellshock, right, which were against Bash or against OpenSSL and Bash respectively, both open source pieces of technology. How many commercial products were impacted, right? So What are we talking about?
Well, okay, but let's be clear. When we're saying open source technology, do we mean components of part of a commercial package? Do we mean independent, completely open source packages that are being run on their own?
Are we running our business on MediaWiki?
I guess the question is, what is it about open source that they're finding risky? Is I would like to understand. So I am by the way, open source fanboy. In fact, I think in many ways, rightly or wrongly, corporations are better off going commercial off the shelf for a support and life cycle and ability to hire people with that skill set and a whole bunch of reasons that make sense for most companies to go commercial off the shelf. Enterprise level management, stuff like that. I'm not saying across the board, but I'm saying in general, I lean away from open source in the enterprise for those reasons. However, I don't think of open source as inherently more risky. And I would love to know why they think it is.
I've played this out in my mind, and I would love to really, like you said, understand what was going on in their mind when they included that. Which, by the way, I'm sure this was the product of a lot of deliberation. I can't imagine that it just was some person crapped this thing out. They're much more deliberative than that. One of the things I was thinking is, are they talking about like open source that's not supported? But a lot of open source, like Linux, okay, just pick on Linux, right? many companies, many companies run their critical infrastructure on like Red Hat Linux. Is that open source?
Can I interrupt you?
Go ahead.
I just did a quick Google search, and I found a press release from the FFIEC from October 21st, 2004. Mind you, 11 years ago.
Okay.
But I want to read this. The FFIEC today published guidance for examiners, financial institutions, and technology service providers on the acquisition of use of free and open source software. Free and open source software refers to software that users are allowed to run, study, modify, and redistribute without paying a license fee. Some of the most well-known examples are FOSS or Linux, Apache, MySQL, blah, blah, blah. The use of FOSS is increasing within the mainstream information technology and financial services industries. The agencies are of the opinion that the use of free and open source software does not pose risks that are fundamentally different from risks presented by proprietary or self-developed software. However, the acquisition use of FOSS necessitates implementation of unique risk management practices.
Yeah. But that's not fundamentally different than commercial software. I mean, you should be considering the risk of whatever software you happen to be using. And so I guess what gets under my skin is there is no corresponding line that says, use of commercial software or, so anyway, I guess one of the things that bothers me most is how do you answer the question? Right? Is it that you use, your main banking application or business application runs on top of Linux? Well, that's open source. So, but you have it, but it comes from a commercial provider. You have, you've got support for it. So how is that different than if you were to run it on top of Windows? I'm having a real hard time coming up with a distinction.
I have trouble too. So in theory, this cyber risk assessment tool is going to go into action next year. So for those who are covered by the FFIEC, this is coming. So they walk into a financial institution and they see you running a crap load of Apache servers running on Linux. They're going to ding you on that?
Well, so let's put it in context, right? So this is, there isn't like a wrong answer on any one of these things. It's kind of a cumulative total. And I one of the things I don't like necessarily about this, having gotten really big into statistics and risk assessments and quantitative things, they're basically you basically go through this big list of risk items and you pick based on where you're at from low to medium or from low to least to most, across each one of these, and you total it up at the bottom, and you say, well, I've got 5 leasts and 4 moderates, and then you say, well, I've got a lot more moderates than I have anything else, so I must be moderate, and that's my inherent risk. And then you have the other side, which is the maturity scale, and the maturity scale, by the way, is a very expansive part of the document because it has quite a few different measurement domains, and each one of those domains you have to register. You have to rate yourself from I forget the scale right now, but from effectively from least mature. Actually, they call it baseline through innovative, and so that all of the scales I'll just read through is baseline, evolving, intermediate, advanced, and innovative. And they kind of have obvious connotations, but again, like the inherent risk, they have some pretty specific statements about what comprises each level of maturity, which again, I kind of like that, from the perspective that it takes some of the subjectivity out of the equation. And then you effectively go through and you figure out, are you across all these different domains, are you innovative, or baseline, or where do you fall in that continuum? And then you effectively add it all up, and you then compare yourself, your inherent risk aggregate score versus your maturity aggregate score, and they have a handy little heat map table that kind of shows that your aggregate risk or your inherent risk and your maturity kind of need to be in parity, right? So if you have very little risk, as an example, right? If you have the least amount of risk, you need to be you can effectively be baseline, right? Or if you are if you have the most inherent risk, then you need to be on the innovative maturity side, which again conceptually makes a ton of sense, right? One of the concerns I have is they've done a great job of like with the caveat that some of the questions are a little odd, like the open source one, but they've done a great job of making these things more objective, right? So you kind of answer yes or no, but then you kind of add it up. And if anybody wants to know why that's a problem, I have a couple of good books I can point you to. It's not a great idea to add it up like that.
But nonetheless, this is coming.
But nonetheless, it is coming, absolutely.
So rightly or wrongly, people are going to start getting measured against this.
Yes. And so, maybe some of the more mature organizations will kind of point out that there's better ways to do this, maybe. But again, I'm not.
Yeah, it could evolve.
I'm not. Right? I'm not throwing. I don't want to throw rocks at it because again, I think they're trying to advance the state of the art, and I can't fault them for that.
Yeah, and I would say too that even if you're not in the banking industry, this is probably worth taking a look at, and just sort of getting your mind around what they're saying and seeing how it might apply to your organization.
Actually, I think especially the maturity scale. If nothing else, the maturity scale is a fantastic kind of roadmap for I would think for all organizations to take a look at and see, in the vein of the security frameworks and whatnot. I think it's a great thing to just read through and kind of figure out if it makes sense for you, right? To assess, right? Okay, here are some opportunities, and maybe it'll jog some brain cells that haven't been firing right. But anyway, I think overall it makes a lot of sense. There are a couple of rough spots that I'm not a big fan of, but I think I'm sure it'll evolve over time. And hey, maybe they'll hear this, and I don't know.
But it is interesting, right? It's one more framework, especially one that actually is fairly influential. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I didn't neglect to mention up front is that apparently this was built based off of an audit they did with I think it was 500. It was a fairly large number of community banks. The FFIC went out and did a canvas and kind of tried to figure out what kinds of risks they had, and they used that to inform this program. So I suspect, I strongly suspect at least, that when you look at some of those inherent risk questions, it probably maps pretty closely back to their experience at those community banks, which are probably smaller institutions.
Yeah, that is one thing we had talked about off the air, which is that this feels like it's pointed at relatively small organizations. There's a whole aspect of going to the CEO and talking about all this stuff and get an assessment and the highest number of connections was like 20.
Yeah, was it 20? It was a relatively low. I think it was 200.
Yeah, 200, right? And if you're a big multinational, you're going to laugh at that sort of thing. So
if you're Bank of America, you're going to have you can have a lot more than that.
Yeah. I have 200 coming to my desktop. I don't know, but it definitely felt like it's geared towards a small organization. Now there isn't valid things that can be learned from it, but you're not going to get your board of directors to stop what they're doing to come play assessment with you if you're at any sized organization.
But at the same time, I do think that the output of this will be will be of interest to them, to the board.
Yeah.
Right. Particularly if you say that, hey, this is something that the FFIC cares about, and we're kind of disjoint.
Absolutely. Like if you are governed by the FFIC, certainly they will care. But if you're Bob's budget bait and dial-in shop, no.
Fair point.
Yeah.
So anyway, that is the show for this week. Anything else you wanted to cover?
No, I think more will be said. I think this week we'll see some more developments in the hacking team stuff. Wondering what else is to be found, how many other 0 days they were sitting on. It'll be interesting to know.
Absolutely.
I do want to say thank you very much to our Patreon donors. You guys rock. If anyone is interested in throwing a couple of bucks at us to support the show, this is purely unsponsored, supported as a labor of love from Jerry and I. If you would like to help offset some of those costs, we have a Patreon site. You're more than welcome to go throw a couple dollars at it, and we will be incredibly appreciative. And we have a little special thank you that we need to get out to our Patreon donors. That we never promised this; they didn't ask for it. This is just something we did, and we got to get that rolling. So.
Yes.
And something I think we'll have at DerbyCon as well for fans of the show. Let's see what else. High Tech Crime Investigation Conference is coming up, right? Are you still going?
I intend to. It's August 30th through September 2nd in Orlando, Florida. htciaconference.org.
I have to go to Michigan to be in a family portrait that weekend.
Really?
Don't ask. It is what it is.
But we will be at DerbyCon.
We will, absolutely. DerbyCon
Together.
is booked, and not together. I mean,
Yeah. I mean,
podcast
at the
co-hosts.
same place at the same time.
I mean, I know it's illegal in every state now, but come on, our significant others should at least be informed before we tell the world.
Well, you heard it here first.
This is how rumors start. What else? I'm blanking. I think that's it.
All right, and just a reminder that you can find a link to the Patreon campaign from our website, www.defensivesecurity.org, and you can also find show notes and old episodes and all sorts of other stuff. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Callett on Twitter at Lurg and me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we'll talk again next week with some more, I'm sure, probably more Flash 0 days. I can only assume.
Yeah, it's a safe bet, I think. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you, as always, for listening.
Take care. Bye.
I'm trying to give you good fodder for the outtakes, which apparently are the favorite part of the show.
That's true. Everybody just zips right to the end.
And there's another outtake for you. It's a meta outtake.
Outtake inception. All right.
What's squeaking? Something squeaking.
It's my goddamn chair. Let me see if I can find a different chair. All the other ones are worse. I'll just sit very still.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.